When it came to weird weapons in World War II, let's just say imagination knew no bounds. But success? Well, let's just say it often missed the mark. From wind-powered cannons to tanks bigger than your house, inventors on all sides were cranking out contraptions that were supposed to turn the tide of war. More times than not, however, they left everyone asking, what were they thinking? In today's episode of the Infographic Show, we'll dive into some of the weird World War II weapons that failed. Imagine a cold September morning on the coast of southwestern England. It's 1943. A crack team from the British Admiralty's Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development has just arrived at a popular seaside beach to test their latest experiment, the Great Panjandrum. As they walk out onto the beach, a self-assured engineer swears this explosive-laden contraption will redefine amphibious landings, tearing through barbed wire and thick concrete walls like a battering ram on steroids. With the invasion of France less than a year away, the Allies are desperate to devise a safe way to breach Hitler's vaunted Atlantic Wall. Could this critical test provide the key they need? A small crowd gathers to watch the beach-going behemoth's first test. The Panjandrum had two massive wooden wheels 10 feet tall, each outfitted with an array of cordite rockets, spaced at equal intervals around a steel outer rim. A steel drum connects both wheels. Naturally, it's stuffed to the rafters with high explosives. In practice, the rockets spin the wheels, propelling the Panjandrum forward through an array of obstacles. Further up the beach, it would then detonate its inner drum, clear a path for the invading forces, and Bob's your uncle. The inspection team stood and watched, giddy with anticipation. In a flash, the rockets ignited with a deafening roar. Only the Panjandrum didn't roll up the beach as planned. Misfiring rockets sent the massive device careening toward a crowd of curious civilian bystanders, who immediately sprinted for cover, all before doubling back on its own launching crew. Before it could crush them, however, it toppled over and exploded harmlessly in a massive fireball. Not the test they envisioned. And unfortunately, things would only get worse. After 3 weeks of tinkering, the test crew returned to the beach. This time, everything seemed to go well, until it didn't. Rolling off its landing cart and into the sea toward the beach, the rockets ignited as a series of crucial clamps gave away, sending the Panjandrum into a nearby crater. This turned it to the right into the path of the cameraman who was filming the test. Hearing the approaching roar, he looked up and ran for his life, glancing up just in time to see a glut of admirals and generals diving for cover into a series of barbed wire entanglements. A split second later, the Wheel of Death crashed into the sea, where it disintegrated in violent explosions, rockets tearing across the beach at great speed. It wasn't pretty, but that was the story of the Great Panjandrum, quietly shelved before it could see combat. It's remembered more as an example of British ingenuity gone awry than a serious weapon of war. Not every weird British invention was a failure. In 1940, as a German invasion seemed imminent during Britain's darkest hour, hundreds of civilian members of the famed British Home Guard woke up one morning to discover a strange artillery piece parked outside their homes. Enter the Smith gun, a desperate yet ingenious invention slapped together by the chief engineer of the Trianco Toy and Appliance Company, a retired Army major named William H. Smith. Smith designed the unique anti-tank gun under his own initiative and, well, it showed. The odd cylindrical contraption was mounted on two wheels and cobbled together with motorcycle brake parts, clutch levers, and cables. This Frankenstein weapon had a 3-inch smoothbore barrel, capable of firing high-explosive rounds, anti-tank rounds, or even grape shot up to 200 meters. Propping the two-wheeled cylinders on their sides, a team of operators could fire the weapon from one half and load it from an improvised ammunition carrier on the other. Oh, and towing it? No problem, just hitch it to the back of your family sedan and you're off to battle. To Smith's dismay, the safety record of his gun was not great. Stories circulated of mishaps with rounds firing or the gun exploding in operators' faces. Yet, for many Home Guard units in 1940, no one really cared how dangerous it was. They just needed something, anything, to stop German tanks. It was a symbol of British ingenuity, proving that in desperate times, even the most makeshift solution could be a vital lifeline. The British Tog Tank. When World War II broke out in 1939, a number of British engineers were still trapped in the headspace of 1918. Enter the British Tog 1 tank, proof that not all throwbacks are a good idea. At 80 tons, the prototype reflected the popular idea that the new conflict, like the last, would be dominated by trench warfare. Of course, the opposite was true. While current events screamed, "We need fast, mobile tanks," the designers at Foster's of Lincoln seemed to say, "Let's just make a lumbering land ship that can bulldoze through everything." The Tog 1 accordingly was massive, slow, and already obsolete from the moment it was drawn up. It had a beastly pair of tracks that spanned the entire 33-foot length of the vehicle, a powerful 75mm howitzer, base of machine guns, and some smoke mortars for cover. Climbing into the Tog felt like getting inside a moving bunker. It was cramped and slow, really slow, its 600 horsepower engine driving it forward at a snail's pace of 5.3 miles per hour. If the enemy had seen it coming, they'd had plenty of time to make themselves and the British a cup of tea before it got close enough to fire. The original designers tinkered with the tank's drive system for 3 years. By then, they realized the machine had no practical use and scrapped the project after one prototype. Was the Tog 2 any better? Not really. It was slightly faster and better armed, but still stuck in the past. In the end, the Tog was a lumbering dinosaur in an era that demanded agile predators. Across the channel, things were not going much better. The German Maus and Land Cruiser P-1000 Ratte. In hindsight, we know the Germans were the most renowned tank designers of World War II due to their innovative, formative tanks like the Panzer IV, Tiger, and Panther. The problem for them was they all too often bought into the idea that bigger is better. Imagine tanks so big they make other tanks look like toy cars, and then you start to get the picture. The German Maus, for example, weighed a whopping 188 tons, the heaviest tank ever built. Armed with a 128mm gun, it could destroy any Allied tank well before they came within earshot of this Goliath. Leave it to the German engineers to get the Maus crawling along at a whopping 12 miles per hour, more than double the British Tog 1 despite doubling its British peer in weight. It was a fortress on tracks. Still, there were too many problems to count. It guzzled gas by the ton. It was so heavy it couldn't cross most bridges. And it was so expensive to build, the Germans only built 2 prototypes, perhaps trying to compensate for something smaller. We'll call it Hitler's ego. But that's nothing compared to the Land Cruiser P-1000 Ratte. This insane supertank was basically a battleship on land. We're talking 5 times as large as the Maus and over 120 feet long, armed with actual naval guns from a battleship. Imagine a literal city block on tracks. Luckily for both sides, it never got past the drawing board because it would have been as vulnerable as it was absurdly overpowered. Hitler's wind cannon. Lumbering land ships and towable anti-tank guns are certainly strange, but not beyond the realm of imagination. Fortunately for us, Hitler's team of sycophantic engineers were more than willing to think outside the box to satiate der Führer's appetite for Wunderweapons. And here's where things get really weird. Let's just put it this way. You wouldn't want to be a bird flying over the Elbe River Bridge in 1945. That year, a team led by an Austrian doctor installed a bizarre anti-aircraft weapon that used explosive charges of hydrogen and oxygen to fire compressed air and water vapor at speeds of up to 870 miles per hour. The idea was that this blast could create an artificial tornado, one capable of destabilizing low-flying enemy aircraft. Sounds cool in theory, right? In practice, let's just say it blew. And not in the right way. In tests, the wind cannon managed to deliver a slug of high-velocity air potent enough to crush a 25mm thick wooden board 200 meters away. Pretty remarkable. If it had worked firing upward, it would have saved German munition factories a lot of work. Only it didn't. The air blasts dissipated so quickly, enemy aircraft would virtually have to fly right into the cannon, and that was never going to happen. Like many of the Third Reich's wonder weapons, the wind cannon was an over-engineered solution to a problem that required more practical answers. It never saw combat. Just like many other Nazi superweapons, it was nothing more than hot air. Japan's Ohka flying bomb. Halfway across the world, the Japanese were discovering a thing or two about hot air. More of the hot, fiery type and less of the compressed variety. In late 1944, they went full speed ahead on their Ohka program, a plot to build a fleet of rocket-powered flying bombs as desperate as any of Hitler's wonder weapons. These purpose-designed flying bombs, unlike the German V-bombs, were manned. In any other country, perhaps recruitment would have been, well, challenging. Imagine the pitch. Hey, want to become a pilot? See the world? Well, we got this rocket-powered bomb that you can fly straight into enemy ships. No return ticket, but think of the glory! In reality, Japan had stumbled into a first-generation anti-ship cruise missile. The first powered prototypes were tested by a team led by Lieutenant Commander Tadanao Miki and Lieutenant Kazutoshi Nagano. They were eager to prove the concept. One of the test pilots, however, took a good look at the early Yokosuka MX-Y7 Ohka and called it a flying coffin. Reality hit him at the worst time. He could not move past the fact that he was the bomb. The aircraft was small, barely big enough for a pilot, and had no landing gear. It looked like a manned missile with a cockpit in the front and rocket boosters in the rear. Bombers carried the piloted bombs toward the enemy fleet on their underbelly, dropping them close to the target. Once released, they'd ignite the rockets, accelerating up to speeds no anti-aircraft gun could stop, about 650 miles per hour. On paper, it sounded devastating. In reality, not so much. While a few managed to hit their targets and cause limited damage, most Ohkas never even got close. Allied ships and aircraft either downed the slow-moving bombers before they could deploy their precious cargo, or they failed to launch altogether, hampered by a host of technical issues. Conceived out of desperation, the Ohka program was a short-sighted last-ditch attempt to strike back at the enemy on a shoestring budget. While a handful of lucky pilots managed to live to share their experiences, one of the program's glaring problems was that its feedback loop of the Ohka's effectiveness was, well, let's just say, it ended with a bang for most pilots. With no one left alive after the missions, it was hard to refine the design. In the end, the Ohka was more of a symbol of Japan's desperation than a useful weapon. We'd be remiss to end another video on the weirdest weapon failures of World War II without mentioning another symbol of desperation: the Soviet suicide dogs. Back on the Eastern Front, the Soviets decided to reserve the most suicidal missions for their canine friends. Here's how it worked. Dogs were starved for days. Then pieces of meat were placed under practice tanks. The dogs would then think that they could find food under every tank. The plan: send them under enemy tanks, where they would trigger a set of explosives strapped to their backs. Fearless and fast, using dogs seemed like a perfectly sane and effective means of crippling a portion of the Nazi war machine, then pouring over the eastern steppes. The problem was, the dogs couldn't tell a Soviet tank from a German one. Struggling with the noise and the chaos of battle, Soviet handlers watched in horror as their dogs turned back toward them. Imagine the horror as bomb-laden dogs bolted back towards their owners, thinking it was time for a snack. Good boy. Wait, no, wrong tank! Looks like the Soviet suicide dogs weren't exactly man's best friend. Their employment in battle, grim as it was a reflection of desperation, highlighting just how far the Soviets were willing to go to repulse a far grimmer German invasion. On that explosive note, go check out the weirdest military weapons they actually used in World War I, or click this video instead.